So yeah, how I came upon primal sleeping is what I'll start with, like you said, without going into what it is quite yet. But I just had found myself for many years in a place in my marriage. I'd been married at that point almost 10 years and had been in that same relationship for 2 or 3 years before that. So I found myself, we had had 2 kids together and they were very young at the time. And when I came up with this, and I had 2 older children from a previous marriage. So we had a house full. So my husband and I had been very disconnected, to say the least. And he had started a company. We moved from California to Georgia to start a company. So
listen to her accent. That's
only took me a decade to pick it up. Apparently I have it now. I don't even notice, but people say I do. So I just felt so disconnected, and I would talk to friends and be like, do you feel the same? And I felt a lot of agreement about how they felt, but I felt like other people, for whatever reason, were able to just be more accepting of it and just be like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the way it is.
And accepting, meaning what? Meaning the disconnection, no longer having intimacy, things like
yes. Okay. Yes. I mean, we kind of commiserated about, our husbands, and really gossiped about them being, kind of dorks and useless when it comes to taking care of the babies. And, really, I joke now about how bad we ruin our mate's reputation when we talk about them behind their back, but in addition to that, accidentally in front of the kids. But that was certainly what we were doing, as we were getting through these young baby ages and stuff and trying to raise these kids. And I think my husband just became someone I didn't look at as a partner or a teammate at all anymore. So, and certainly not someone I was madly in love with. But we had a big family, and I just didn't know how we were going to get anything more than that. I kind of got to a place of desperation and hopelessness, really, because I realized, or thought I realized, that this was it. This is why people say marriage is hard. So that's where I found myself. And then I just kind of couldn't accept that this is it. I was like, this cannot be. There's got to be something else. There's got to be more to this. So that's where I sort of stumbled upon primal sleeping.
So tell us, or I'd like to know, is because you did go to see therapists. It was just more conversations, but there was it wasn't creating what you wanted, right? The sexual polarity, the excitement, and so forth.
Exactly. Okay. So yeah, and I would say funny, I didn't even care about the sexual polarity, or I wasn't even that far with it. I just knew, as a female, and I think a lot of women can relate to this, I think men and women go into counseling for different reasons. I went in because I wanted to connect with him, communicate more, right? Like, I want to learn how to communicate so we could be bonded, and he probably wanted to go in and figure out, how can we have more sex? Like, what do I need to do to make her happy so we get to have more sex, like, which were both fine, desires and requests. But coming out of it, we counseling for 5 years, I believe. There was a whole lot of talking that went on, not as much sex as my husband probably would have liked out of all the thousands of dollars we spent on it. And we both still just felt like, this is it. Like, if that's what you do when you're in trouble, and therapy is the answer and it's the only answer, like, I guess this is as good as it gets.
Yeah. So tell us about primal sleeping and how that shifted your bodies. And I want to address that too, is because when I coach couples, it's not about like what you're going to do in the head and like say compromise and not be yourself. It's really about, until there's, say, emotional resonance there, until that the energies are aligned. For example, if a person is like overstimulated and their nervous system is in fight or flight, it would be no differently than them being in a tree and hiding from, say, a saber-toothed cat, and then just to ask them, hey, do you want to have sex with me? Right. They're not going to be connected to that. So more than often when clients come to see me, they're caught up in the story, and therefore they're like so far apart that the communication, whatever they say, is still not going to get them there, which is what you're going to lead to a little bit.
Yeah.
But one exercise I do, especially when clients are arguing,
Mhm.
And it doesn't happen often, but sometimes something will happen right outside. Like literally, like they get in a fight about that
Mhm.
one thing.
Right.
So they show up and they're like more in that moment to vent. And what I've done is I've had these clients put their backs up against each other, close their eyes, get into meditative state. It doesn't take very long. And I just say, but they're there. I said, I want you to imagine you only have 10 minutes to live because a bomb has been launched. What do you really want to say? And
Right.
typically the room will get really quiet.
Yeah.
Typically one of them will cry or both of them will cry. It's usually, I'm sorry, I love you. In that
Yeah.
moment, you'll see both their bodies soften, and then they're more receptive, and then they're
Yeah.
ready to listen and then to build from there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just an argument for, an hour.
Yeah. Totally.
So, yeah. So share about how you discover primal sleeping and how it's
Yeah.
been working.
No, that's great. I love that you said that because it's actually a segue into what, I'm going to talk about, unbeknownst to you. But so words couldn't get us there, right? I'm a fairly good communicator. And my husband's actually a fairly good communicator. And so it was interesting that all the talking in the world couldn't get us there. And I mean, we even tried, 20-minute talk times and all this stuff. And thinking that, we were doing all the exercises and not getting the results. Right. And so finally one day I was like,
Just tell her she's pretty.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I came up with all kinds of ideas on how he could make it better. Maybe if you brought me flowers every once in a while,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe tell me I'm beautiful. Maybe, here's what you can do. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can do. And he's kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
and then he might get something that night, but then, the next week it was, well, what have you done for me lately? Like, I don't feel close to you again. So, so it was this vicious cycle. It was ridiculous after a while. It's laughable now. But at the time I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Well, in prayer and meditation one morning, I just got really clear about, I keep asking for connection, and connection isn't just verbal connection in words, right? Words lead to something, right? Usually. And I don't just mean sexually, but words lead to things, right? Words lead to relationships and different things. You get to know people. So I thought, I've always said I'm not a touchy person. And I know that has to have some impact on our lack of closeness, So I said, all of a sudden, I was very clear, what if you just stop talking and just decided to strip down naked and sleep naked next to your husband every night? And I literally was like, excuse me? Like, did I just have that thought? Like, it was interesting because I thought to myself, that's not something I would come up with as a solution, being a untouchy person. And I didn't feel close to him at the time. So that seemed like the polar opposite of what I'd want to do. Because we had lived in that reward punishment system of like, we only were together if I was in a good place and he was in a good place and we were feeling it and all that. And and if he was doing the, what I wanted him to do, how I wanted him to do it, really is what it came down to. Then there was, connection. So I just found that I got the nerve up to come in and say, hey, babe, I got an idea. What do you think if we were to strip down completely naked, leave all that shit at the door, basically, and just be next to each other? I wonder what would come up. Like, and I said, just for a week, let's just try it. And of course, he was like, okay, excuse me. Whose idea was this? I'm like, mine. So he said, well, I'm in. So when do we start? And I was like, well, we'll start tonight. So we did. And we can share a little more as we go along about how that went. But that's how it came about.
Well, no, go ahead, share
Okay.
the results. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was so that night it was time to go to bed, and it wasn't this big to do. I didn't strip down piece by piece. I literally lights off and got next to my bed, peeled my clothes off, and jumped in bed and like moved next to him, and we slept next to each other. And he is like, is this what you were talking about? I was like, yeah, this is it. And he goes, well, what do we do now? I was like, I don't know. Let's just lay here and see what happens. And so he put his arm around me kind of awkwardly. And we just kind of, because normally in the past, I found this later, because as I shared it, people shared back with me that it's fairly common that people don't get into bed naked unless, something's about to happen. And so we were in this little awkward gap of like, okay, we're not normally naked unless we're having sex or about to have sex. And not that it's off limits that we're not going to have sex, but this is so undefined, like that it was really a little awkward for both of us at first, unknown territory. So we just laid there. And when I say naked, it's everything. It's undies, nightie, all that. Because some girls will say, well, I wear a thong. Is that okay? I'm like, it's okay. It's just not primal sleeping, but it's okay. That's what you want to do. Because there's this next level, when you remove that last layer, where you are truly just naked next to each other. And then this energy starts to go, like you said, like there's this energy, and our bodies like naturally started to just sort of align with each other. And it was almost, for lack of a better word, magical. It was interesting. So
tell me more. Share like what happened, how long it took, and then how the sex increased, and then it seemed to resolve and seep into better communication, just overall.
Yes.
Not sweating over like the small things. Like,
yep.
Share it all. Yes.
Absolutely. So that first night was, for me, I hardly slept. I felt so self-conscious. I felt like almost embarrassed that I was so embarrassed, because I was like, this is my husband who I choosing to spend my life with, who I'm supposed to be, quote unquote, the most vulnerable with. And yet I'm feeling so uncomfortable just being naked under the covers next to him. So it was a real reality check for where we had been living and where I'd been living, going to bed in sweats or flannel pajamas, or what the most unromantic thing you can think of. I would go to sleep in. So when I was laying there and he had fallen asleep, and I laid there, and I struggled with how things were laying and flopping, and just past trauma in my life, and just sort of struggling to relax, really, is what happened in that first night. So what I did was, and I even cried a little, because I think I was a little bit surprised at where we were, and a little bit surprised at how vulnerable I felt. And then at the same time, I was sad that this is where I was at and where we were at. And what I did naturally was I kind of moved closer to him. He fell asleep with his arm around me, but I don't know, movement and stuff, we had moved apart. And so I just kind of backed up against him and felt safe and fell asleep. And I slept real light that night, because it was like this terror that like the sheets were going to be off of me at some point or something accidentally, and he was going to like get a glimpse of just a bad view or something. I don't know what I thought, and the joke is that as if I thought I was hiding my body from him in the first place. I mean, I'd been with him that long. He knew what it looked like, but I was really hiding it from me. And so that first night, I woke up the next morning and said, oh my gosh, that was crazy, but good, but scary. And I was surprised to hear him say, it was for me too. And I was like, what? And he said, yeah, I mean, it felt kind of odd to be in bed naked and have it not be that we're about to have sex or be sexual, And he said, I kind of didn't know what to do. And so that was a really interesting thing for him to go through too, to process as a guy, because he normally would sleep in underwear, for example. And just that one last layer, he's like, I mean, yeah, you're not used to.
So are you now having more sex? Are you now, what I'm saying is like, what's that story now? Where are you now? Like, where is like the relationship now? How did it change things for the better now?
Yeah, good question. So ultimately that was the process, and what happened that we did not expect. That was 3 years ago. And we still primal sleep. And what happened was it became a way of life, because it flowed. So sure, there was a surge of sex at first, because, to be honest, one, he hadn't had me naked next to him night after night after night for a really long time. And I actually surprised myself, and there were times when I spontaneously wanted to have sex, which in the past would have been more of a decision, like, are we going to have sex or whatever. We'd come that far that we were that disconnected. So the sex got really good,
Hmm.
and we connected, and we felt really, really close. And it was like exploring each other all over again. But like you're saying, and I had shared with you before, the cool part was it flowed into the rest of our life. When he got up for work the next morning, for example, he said, because of the masculine and feminine, so when his arm's on me and it's heavy and it's strong, whether I'm awake or not, I'm feeling that masculine energy. And when my body's lying next to him and it's soft and it's feminine and it's everything he's not, he's feeling that feminine energy, which in polarity, he feels masculine. And so he's like, I'm like getting up ready to face the day. Like, this is pretty cool. And, the last thing I want to do is get out of bed because I just see you lying there naked and beautiful. And gosh, so it created, yeah, just a total connection in relationship. And then one thing I'll share about another thing, reward system that we talked about earlier, I alluded to, was when you primal sleep, whether you are angry or not at the person. And that's where it becomes primal sleeping as a way of life, because there have been times when I'm angry and I find myself wanting to keep my clothes on. And then I remember, oh yeah, I used to use that as a weapon. I used to use that as a tool to express my anger to him, or passive aggressive. And so I sometimes reluctantly take my clothes off. Well, what happens relationally is he's already naked in bed under the covers, unbeknownst to me. And I get in, and he said to me, what that says to him is, she's still here. Like, she's still in it. We're
Still
still in it.
present. She's
She's
still
pissed
here with
off,
me. Yes.
but we're in it. Like,
Yeah.
we're still in agreement. We're still a couple. We're still together. And so there we do. We lay next to each other naked, pissed off or not.
Hmm.
And so in the morning, I found sometimes we have to talk about something, but often, like the endorphins that get released, the oxytocin, the feel good, the love hormone, they call it,
Hmm.
it gets released. And sometimes we don't even have to talk about it. I don't even remember why I was mad.
Hmm. This is thank you for sharing that. So, there's a few things you shared. Well, I would like to talk about more, but what I really like is how you talked about, like, basically this has energized your relationship. It has helped with the communication. There's more flow, and whatever you were doing, say, trying to talk it out, didn't work, and now this is working, which is why you probably call it primal sleeping also, because it's connecting to, like, just who you really are, your true essence. And I mentioned to you that at the core, we're just basically energy, neutral energy. And in order for there to be a spark of electricity, you have to have a negative and positive pole to create that polarity. And so if you see that in a man and a woman, or however way the relationship is, and that there is something, a wedge, whether it's consciously, like, I'm mad at you,
Mhm.
or they're sleeping in separate rooms to
Right.
where they're just cut off,
Hmm.
there's no way for that energy to start flowing. And what it does is starts releasing a lot of neurochemicals in your body to make you feel good. And what people don't realize is that when they hold themselves as, say, prisoner in a relationship, when they create what I call these cognitive constraints, such as, I'm going to be mad at him, you're
Right.
choosing to be mad. But when you're doing that, you're also releasing cortisol in your body. So if you're going to try to even have a conversation with your partner with you already feeling very stressed out, where do you think it's going to go?
Yeah.
So kind of what I hear is that through this primal sleeping, it kind of bounces out the nervous system to where there's some type of equilibrium between you two. And sometimes you need to talk, sometimes you don't,
Right. No,
which is
that's
really
absolutely
powerful.
true. And guaranteed the talk went better than it would have gone had we not primal slept. Um, and so that's why, and the reason I say sometimes we still need to talk is because, yeah, it doesn't magically fix everything. There are some things that still have to be talked about. But what's crazy is, like you said with cortisol, it's like it's been proven scientifically that when there's skin on skin touch, it lowers your cortisol, and that's, as you know, the fight or flight. And it also burns belly fat, bonus, right? So
Mhm.
um so at that point, by the time I wake up, I'm not in the fight or flight anymore. And I've had oxytocin released in addition to that. So I may still have to tell them, hey, really bugs me when you do this or that. But it's just, it comes from a completely different energy at that
Absolutely.
point. Yeah.
So before we go any further, thank you, Christina, for joining us, Lilia and Elizabeth. And if you have any questions, put them here or whatever else. I'm looking at this also, but thank you for joining us. So you started talking about a little bit about the benefits. What are there other, like, say, neurochemicals or benefits, scientific benefits that have been shown?
Yeah, I mean, the main ones are the oxytocin. So it releases oxytocin, and and the cortisol is lowered, and therefore you are less anxious. The other is the temperature of your body. When we put on clothes, we're manipulating the temperature of our body, obviously. If you're cold, you put on something to warm you up. Well, sometimes people go to bed like I did with too much clothing on, and I don't know it, but I'm sleeping hot, maybe even. And so another benefit is your body, when you're together, your bodies, if he runs hot and you run cold, for example, and you sleep next to each other, they balance out. And then that helps with digestion, believe it or not, and inflammation. So it lowers inflammation in your body. And, some inflammation we know is linked to cancer. So there's all kinds of health benefits to it.
Builds your immune system and
Oh, and it
reduces
builds the immune system, right?
and the
Point.
biggest one is inflammation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right.
A lot of people are inflamed.
Yes, they
So
are.
yeah, it's interesting how that all plays out into conversations also.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I like this because I'm a believer of first energy and then maybe words. So if the energy is not aligned behind the words mean nothing.
Right.
So that's why, like, waking up to that space in the morning, like, over aligned, oh, this is what we want to feel anyway. Why do we need more words to bring us in when we're already in? We're
right.
together.
Right. Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I agree.
It's like, I don't know if you ever had an argument with a partner, your present partner, where, like, you just want him to shut up and say, just kiss me.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
or you have an argument and spontaneously you both start busting up. You're like, what are we talking about?
Yeah. What are we doing?
It takes so much work to keep the continuity illusion of that one thing you want to argue about. So, like, for example, most people who say are experiencing a lot more stress are, oftentimes, this is just a whole, this is a generalization. Oftentimes they might be watching the news and the negativity, social media, or they keep, like, there's maybe a family problem to where they're having phone calls with people talking about maybe someone who's sick or someone acting out a particular way. But if they don't break away from that, their nervous system gets caught up in that story. So all they're feeling is stress in their body. And when you're in fight or flight, again, like as I mentioned about, about the man being up in a tree and he's trying to hide from a saber-tooth cat, it's not like you're going to walk up to that man and go, hey, how you feeling?
Right.
You're talking that way, he maybe want to punch you. So it's about being able to connect back to that relaxed state so both people be open. And ultimately, when we're talking to someone, what's interesting about this is that we're attempting to feel good. But it would be equivalent to me doing this. Okay, everybody, we're going to meditate now. We're going to just drop into your breath.
Right.
Trust me, I'm going to get you there.
Yeah. It's a whole, I want you to love me more.
It's like, oh, you're scaring me though.
Yeah, exactly. That's all I want. Treat me feminine and soft. Like, oh, okay, tell me how.
Exactly.
It was that, and I think that's what I kept coming up against was this strong personality of mine asking him to treat me soft and feminine and gentle, and it was like, wow, how do I do that? You're yelling at me all the time, or you're nagging at me all the time, or you're pissed off, whatever. So that's the other thing. It allowed me to become the best version of myself because I didn't really want to be all those things. I wanted to be close to him. And I didn't know at that point, I was running out of ways or ideas of how to accomplish that. And so when, brilliantly, we just stripped it all away and went back to our primal self, we didn't have to do any more of that. We stopped going to counseling. I mean, pretty shortly after that. And we just didn't need it. Yeah. We just didn't need it. And so yeah, and I think so much of that had to do with just like you said, not speaking at each other anymore. And I like what you said about that, like for us, for example, when sorry, my phone, I thought I turned it off. So when we came together at night, for example, we stripped everything off, all the labels, right? Because you go out into the world and maybe you're a lawyer and you're this and you're that, or I'm a mom. And we always say, and I'm sure you hear this when you're counseling people, like making that shift is so hard for like a mom. They're like, I'm mom all day. And then I get in bed and he wants me to do this like sex kitten. Like it's hard to really transition, like you're saying, the person in the tree. Like, hey, are you in the mood? Hey, no, I'm not in the mood. But what happens is that, you know, and the way it was designed, I believe now, is that no, I may not be in the mood when I get into bed, but we're not asking the question anymore. We're just letting nature take its course. And all of a sudden, I'm surprised and maybe I'm in the mood, you know, and I wouldn't have known that had he asked me 10 minutes earlier. I would have said, no, not maybe, you know. So that's been really one of the cool things that's come out of it, just a supernatural flow. And I want to answer one thing you asked about the sex surge, because people say all the time, like, oh my God, if I can't do that. If I did that, I'd never get sleep. My husband want to have sex every night. And I always say to them, you know what, that does happen, you know, and there's a surge, but currently my husband and I have less sex and more quality sex than we used to. And he says that part of that experience comes from, he didn't realize when he was asking for sex, oftentimes he really wanted touch. And the only time he really got touched was when we had sex. So he'd ask for sex, not knowing even consciously that he would have been okay with just touching my body and feeling it, and him feeling, and me feeling him, not even sexually. So there was this like sort of, he got to be the best version of himself too, not, you know, begging for sex all the time or thinking about it all the time or whatever. He may think about it all the time still. I have no idea, but he doesn't, he just says my cup is full. It feels, that's the best way to describe it.
I want to talk about a little bit maybe of the traumatic stuff, but before we go into it, is that you mentioned about, you know, how therapy did not work. What's interesting with the coaching that I do, and to kind of bring maybe language to this, is that what most couples don't know, what I'm doing is that I'm teaching them Tantra. So Tantra is a thread of meditation to connect to the body. And in a lot of these practices, what you're doing is letting go who you think you are. So from the classes I've been to as far as what I've been taught by my mentors, a big part of it is looking into your partner's eyes and noticing, say, your fear, your anger, what you were blocking about your own self, about your body. That is in a way all the time until it's healed. And then secondly, if you are caught up in your labels, then how are you present to the now moment? So these exercises that we would do, say with Tantra, would be able to, like that exercise I did with the back.
Yeah.
That could be considered that, because we're moving to more of the energetic space. And of course, I would have them look into each other's eyes, and then we would go into the heart space. And then we would talk to what's really important, not the fight. Because see, if you talk about the details of the fight, you don't arrive to happiness in what you prefer.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's really getting to that space. So you're kind of in a way are naturally getting there.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. So but you brought up about how you're lying there and you had a lot of these negative thoughts about yourself. Yeah. Those are the stories that create, say, crappy sex or grudge sex or just no sex, whatever it is. And so in time, it's easier to like have sex with each other because your baggage might not be coming up to where you're just so excited sexually, physically, it's new. But in time, your stuff starts showing up. You might feel crappy about yourself. So of course, you're not going to want to share your body with that person.
Right.
Men might be a little bit different, and that is where they'll do it to release stress, to where they're just horny, whatever.
Yeah.
But in time, as they get older, you are no longer, because they've seen you so many times that, they're seeing that you change, you have your ups and downs.
Yeah.
So unless that's healed, it's kind of that story's there, and that is the block that is there that might be keeping you from connecting to on a deeper level. So in a way, without even like using therapy or words that going into the head, by being in a primal place and letting that story go, you're able to be with what's important to even this. Wow, I really don't like my body. Oh, when I was
Yeah.
molested, that's maybe why this happened, because that is
Yeah.
something that could be very difficult for, and you and I discussed it was okay to talk about this, but
Yeah.
you mentioned
Yeah.
that you remember being really uncomfortable to be looked at or touched because of a prior incidents or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you elaborate on that? Like what like not the details of what happened, but because this one is your child, I noticed that I didn't.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No, that definitely played in. And what was interesting is part of why we went to therapy was to work through that trauma, because we
What
had.
was the trauma?
So I had been molested
Okay.
on a few occasions,
Okay.
starting around age 12.
Okay.
And from then on, I decided that no one was ever going to touch me that I didn't give permission to.
Mm-hmm.
And, which is great, right? It kept me safe, and I needed that strength and personality and behavior to be able to do that. So, but what happened was later on in life that carried over into my relationship in my marriage, where I was safe and I still was practicing that behavior on some level. And so that behavior wasn't really serving me anymore. I didn't need it anymore, but I didn't know how to get rid of it. It had been sort of my friend for a long time. And so we went into therapy. Truly, my husband just said, we've got to do something. Like, this is impacting us, and we've got to deal with that trauma. And he at that time was the only person I had ever told. So he knew about it. And I was pissed. I was like, I don't want to go in and talk about it, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. We went in and talked about it. And I came out still feeling like shit. And I was like, months and months and years of that, not just talking about that, but addressing the trauma. Well, that's why I think I found this to be so interesting, the primal sleeping, and why it was, I think, blew my husband's mind when I was the one that suggested it, because it dove right into the fire, sort of, but it didn't re-trigger me, because I was going towards love, and I was going towards connection with someone I knew I was safe with. And I think in the end, I needed less words and just more good memories of safe feelings and energy with the person that I loved and that I knew logically I was safe with. And I just needed more of those, built up, where I wasn't controlling it. Because, it started out, like, it got to a point in our marriage where it was like, okay, lights off, chew some gum, don't move the covers too slow, don't move them too fast, put the music on, that's too loud, that's too high. I mean, it almost got like, what is that? Obsessive compulsive, because I thought or believed that I needed to stay in control of all things in the bedroom because of that past trauma. So it was just my walls that kept me safe. At one point, it became my prison, and our prison, really. And so I think for him, what a great relief to just, all I gotta do is get naked. I don't have to do all that dog and pony stuff anymore. And you're just gonna be naked. I'm like, yeah. It was like, brilliant. Let's do it. And so, yeah. So I think there was a natural healing that took place over time.
I mentioned to you that when I work with women who have been molested, raped, and so forth, that one exercise that I have them do if they have a partner is where they are to lay naked, either on a bed, massage table, on the floor, and their partner is to just kind of light touch, like raking, but not sexual, not stimulating the genitals. And the woman is to say harder, softer, but she's in complete control, rather than switching the light down and all this other stuff, more like control of the man. So she feels like she can own this and trust him more. But more often they end up crying, because it's not about him wanting to have sex with her. It's to worship her like a goddess, for her to feel her body, to even where she might go like by the thighs, and she starts trembling. because she remembers tighten it when that trauma happened.
Right.
And there's still like cellular memory maybe in there.
Yeah.
So in that process is that release. And you mentioned how being naked, you had moments where you cried. You were releasing that energy that didn't need to be there anymore.
Yeah, I did. And we did try some of that stuff, and I wasn't ready for it. I'll just be honest. I wasn't ready for it. When he did start to touch me there, I was like, okay, stop. I don't like this. I don't want to do this anymore. I was still in the control seat, right? And I wasn't ready to give it up. And so that's why I think for me with Primal Sleeping, what was so cool was I didn't have to do anything. I literally just had to show up naked and lay there and stay committed to it. And all this work kind of went on even in my sleep, I almost want to say, you know.
It did.
Yeah. Okay. So in my sleep and the tears, you know, sometimes, like I said, and I, you know, I'd just fall asleep and sometimes I'd be crying and it wasn't hysterical. It was just a release, like you said. And so it created that space of healing. So
thank you. So what are like some common fears, concerns, questions that say women have and then men have? You mentioned one of them, that he's always gonna want to have sex with me.
Yeah.
What are other ones?
Oh gosh. So there's so many that women have. I've done primal sleeping talks quite a few times to groups of women, and they always think they're going to stump me with some reason why they can't do it, why they're special in particular, and their situation is different. So it's always kind of cute. But the biggest ones and the most common ones are I'm not comfortable with my own body, and so the last thing I want to do is be butt naked next to him. And some say when I lose a few pounds, I'll do it. You know, that's 20 pounds and I'll do it. So body, obviously body, self-consciousness, which again, and Ray, you and I talked about this earlier, before this interview. And that is, it's like, who are they hiding from? Because at the end of the day, like
exactly.
that's who you're with, you know? And one woman said to me, I don't know if I want to see my husband naked. I was like, oh God. And she, you know, she worked out and she was in shape and he wasn't. And she was like, I don't know. I said, well, that's something to look at. You know, it's something to think about. That's something to, cause you still have choices, right? If you get in bed night after night and things don't flop or do the things you want, you can't come to terms with that's what is.
You need to have a conversation. You have to have the transparent conversation about that.
Yes. And, or if it's you have to make some decisions to do something different. If you don't like the way it flops and drops and moves, I mean, or not. And the decision really is just, am I going to do something about it? Or am I going to accept it? And if I accept it, either one's okay, but I'm going to have to do one or the other, because I'm going to keep getting naked night after night if I stick to this agreement. Right. So,
how about kids? How about kids? I mean, because a lot of parents have kids. What's that? What are they like? Kids gonna walk in, or what is it?
Yep. So that's always one. So it's always body, too much sex, and kids. Three major ones.
What do you say to the ones with kids? What do you say to them?
Yeah. So the ones with kids, it's actually a really kind of cool, interesting thing. So we have kids, obviously, as I said earlier on, and our kids, when we started this, were 9 and 7. So we just decided, we had a talk and we said, you know what? I think at the end of the day, as we know, what we model is more important than what we say to our kids about their bodies and about their sexuality and all that. Right. So in no way would I promote this idea that we, you know, all of a sudden we just start walking around naked and, you know, it was a free for all. We responsibly sat our kids down and said, hey, guess what? I don't know if you know this, and they didn't know it because it hadn't been happening up till then, but they needed to know. I don't know if you know this, but did you know when you get married, you get to have a naked sleepover? And they were like, what? And I said, yeah, you know how like you have your friends sleepover, right? And you all sleep with clothes on, rightfully so. But when you're married, you actually get to have a naked sleepover. And they're like, do you guys sleep naked? And we both said, yeah. And I said, that's one of the treats of being married. Isn't that kind of cool? And they kind of were like, oh yeah, that's cool. And so I thought 2 cool things about that was, 1, they have something to look forward to. And two, we're modeling it, right? So that connection for them, maybe later, they're going to expect that out of their spouse, I hope, right? That, yeah, that's what we're going to do, right? And then the other was my one child said, can I sleep naked in my own bed by myself? And I said, sure, go ahead, as long as you're by yourself. And he said, no, I think I'd be too self-conscious. I just laughed. I said, so even kids are dealing with it. But I'll tell you the thing we said was, here's the guideline. Since we are naked, our clothes are next to our bed in case there's an emergency. Another thing, someone said, I'm afraid there'll be a fire in the house. That was the cutest one I ever heard, I think. They were afraid of a fire, and they had a true fear of a fire happening and them being naked. So we keep our clothes by our bed, and our kids come in our room if they have a bad dream or they need us, and they just ask permission. They say, like my daughter the other night said, Mommy, will you get dressed? I want to get in bed with you. And I say, sure, hold on a minute, honey. So then she'll go in the bathroom or go somewhere, and then I'll get dressed quickly. And then my husband will hear it, or I'll tap him and he's like, got it. And then puts on his underwear. And so they wait. They know. So
this is so good. Thank you for sharing that part. One thing that my parents were very comfortable with. Let me see if anyone's sitting there. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome, Priscilla. And here we go. Thank you, Sean. And hello, Jeff. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. One of the things that I'm so appreciative of my parents is that nudity was never an issue. So they would walk around like, when they're about to get into the shower.
Yeah.
I would take baths with my mom. And so we were very comfortable with that. So my brother and I never grew up with hangups about that. Yeah. And I'm still that way. And I practice that with my son also. We never connected nudity to sex. We just saw nudity just being nude.
Right.
So there wasn't that. There never has been that.
Yeah.
Even for me now. And even to this day, I go to hot springs to where I've been with female friends, and they're attractive and they've been nude around me. And people are surprised, like, you don't want, I'm like, no, they're my friend. I go, my mind want to switch there. I could, but I could be around women. And of course, if you ask me, do I think they're attractive? What do you think? Yes, but I probably don't have the same response. I've also practiced myself into to hold that space, but it's where there wasn't like this taboo or extreme like polarization that I had to have it, because it's where it wasn't blocked. I never had much resistance to it. So it's just very comfortable for me and comfortable be around it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I hope that my kids feel that way when they get older. That is definitely what we're trying to model. I mean, indirectly, right? We were doing it for ourselves, and then we saw, oh, wow, this is actually an opportunity to teach our kids something too, and model, what we hope will be if they decide to get married one day, their marriage, and it's interesting because I had the totally different background. I grew up exposed to pornography and all this stuff at such a young age, that, not to any fault of my mom's, but my dad, who's no longer with us, he passed on a year ago, but would be fine with me sharing this because he really, even to the day he died, didn't see anything wrong with it, which is just where he was at, and that's okay. I came to terms with that, but I didn't know until way later in life that having stacks of Playboy magazines all over the house, accessible, not only accessible, but as reading material in the bathroom, was not normal. And so I grew up looking at these beautiful women with beautiful bodies, airbrushed or not, didn't know at the time. And women were very objectified, and it was very sexual. Nudity was very sexual. So I certainly didn't know that there was nudity without sex. Like, I definitely made the connection that that's when you get naked. So I'm really hoping, and that's the beautiful thing about doing things different, right? Learning and growing from some of our past, and some of the things our parents did the best they could. And then, they learned and grew too. And now I'm doing the best I can. And hopefully my kids my kids don't know about sex yet. My daughter's getting to the age, but currently they just know that we sleep naked. And when, later I'll make the connection for them at the age appropriate time.
So what are the concerns men have? Just that I forgot to even ask you that.
Yeah, no. You did mention it. I forgot to answer it actually. So men don't have that many. So not a shocker, but they really don't. Most of them, when they hear about it, go, can you talk to my wife? but I've only heard a couple. And they were one, what I mentioned earlier, a guy that's like, oh, I've got a beer belly going now. I kind of, probably should work out or do something before I do that. That's one. And then the other is, it is an interesting phenomenon, I think, when you go from underwear to nothing as a man, because things are not all held in together at the time. And so what my husband experienced was, he's like, things are flopping around. It's just not, you're not used to it. So that's what they experience when they do it. As far as objections, I honestly don't hear very many. I will tell you, sadly, when I've heard about women give me feedback that it didn't really go well, or they brought it home to their husband after an event or something, that I gave a talk on primal sleeping, and that their husband really wasn't that interested in doing it, maybe tried it once or twice. Sadly, I think I've heard feedback later that male at that time was had some guilt and some other reasons for not wanting to be vulnerable with them.
It's usually always the case. This is definitely my field, so I get it,
Okay.
I imagine also the other one is that if the man just keeps having an erection and like he knows that's supposed to be more about connecting first, but that's also if he's feeling judged or he's thinking he's being judged. You know what
Exactly.
I mean?
You don't
She
shame
might
him,
not. Yeah.
it's fine. Like he can have an erection every night. Doesn't mean you have to have sex.
Mhm.
So but if you shame him, so that's the thing. We don't shame. I used to shame him. I don't anymore. He would shame me for not wanting sex. I would shame him for wanting it all the time. It'd be like, dang, do you just wake up hard? Dude, God, it was like this. And he's like, I'm sorry, and that was kind of how we interacted, which is sad now that I think about it. But now if he has one, it's like, oh, hey, how's it going? But I might, kiss him and get out of bed anyway. And because there's not this scarcity mentality that's going on anymore.
So you said something's really important, I think, very key. You said you have less sex, but it's now quality.
Yep.
Okay. So be aware when I work with couples who want to improve it, typically it's not coming from that perspective for like quantity. It is to go on a much deeper level, because that's one thing to keep in mind. One of the reasons why, say, men typically are the ones who become addicted to porn, it's constantly masturbating, because they're not fulfilling what's here.
Yep.
They're not fulfilling that connection. I know about men who would masturbate, cry. They would hate it because it wasn't really connecting to what they want. They felt lonely. And so you also mentioned your husband wanted that connection, wanted to feel that touch. Yeah. So many men can just touch the equipment because of stress. They, or it's for whatever it is. Yeah. And but we're doing here is being able to say it's not just all about getting off. Is that this might be the equipment that creates that, but it's so much more of who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's validation too. I know my husband said there was a lot of him wanting me just to see him, that he felt like before all this, I just looked past him, and I didn't really look at him, and which was true, and so when he was naked night after night after night, I actually asked myself before we started this, if we were in a dark, I don't know why I asked myself these weird questions, but if I was in a dark room, would I even be able to identify my husband's body with my eyes closed, And I thought, I don't think I could. And, or even his, his whole unit situation, like, would I know it from another, now I could probably tell you where every scar is, wherever, and that's just the function of sleeping totally naked next to each other for years and touching each other's bodies. I wouldn't have found that out by just having a lot of sex. So, and it's not me with the lights on exploring, okay, where's his scar? Where's it? Like, let's get to know each other. No, it just happened naturally. So it's the flow, like you're talking about, like we are almost like one now.
I'm going to be a little transparent here. And I say these things because I'm still working on becoming comfortable, because I pretty much, when I'm working with clients, whatever, does not matter. But when I'm on Facebook Live or any type of like interview, it's like, oh, I'm sharing this with thousands of people. I don't know, how will they perceive that? Because you say one little thing, a little bit off, they take that story and run with it. We're not going to go down that path. Yeah. But I'm at a level or in a space in my life where I have had sex with people before, women, and where I found myself losing an erection. And it was, I can tell that she was performing to get me off because that's
Yeah.
how she had done it with her husband, when she was married or whatever. And I can tell that they were doing it for something else. And something would go, something wouldn't work. And then we
Yeah.
have a conversation. And I would say, were you trying to? And they said, yeah. I feel like you were having sex with someone else.
Right.
Now, some guys might hear this, go, what's wrong with that? Well, when you're that connected in your body, it can go two different ways. It could be where you can't have sex if your wife or girlfriend's depressed.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have sex with them if they're really disconnected because you love them so much. You want to do it when it's in the flow. Okay.
Right.
So that's a really positive thing. The other one is this. Even if you might say no sometimes, when you do have it, oh my God, it's fulfilling, like your husband said.
Yeah.
And I'd rather have quality and not be performance driven,
Yeah.
regardless if anyone gets off,
Yeah.
because even that is believe it or not, in Chinese medicine,
Mm-hmm.
there's Taoist masters who would prescribe sex. And for example, it wouldn't be to get off, it would be to energize. So one of the prescriptions were that if he like had low libido or like he had low energy, he might wake up with his erection still because it happens,
Yeah.
and because he goes into parasympathetic mode and the
Yeah.
blood goes into the penis, and most men would want to use it and get off. He would be prescribed to put it in her, and they would go for it, but he wouldn't ejaculate. And
Uh-huh.
what he would do is roll back on his body and feel that energy in his body,
Yeah.
and then they would do their own thing. He
Yeah.
would be thinking about her, feeling energy in his body, or he would feel that kind of like that. So whether you are having the act of sex itself or not, or just sleeping naked, that's
Yeah.
also kind of what is being created, that polarity, that
Absolutely.
liveness, that I'm excited. Now, if
Yeah.
you go into more, you wake up, you're not mindful, I'm just going to put it in.
Right.
You're like that 13-year-old masturbating, just because you're horny, you got an erection.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
disconnected sex.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
never fulfilling, and it becomes
Yeah.
habit. And habits always end in some shape or form in a negative feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, I agree. And it's funny because I'll be a little transparent too. Here is we before you even said that, it was funny because I was like, oh, am I gonna share that? But it was along the lines of what you just said. So that happens also, and that can be totally unappealing to people or not, but it's just a fact. There's times when we're both dead asleep and things start to function, and we'll wake up the next day and we're like, did we have sex? And he's like, I think we started. And and I'm like, I think we did too. Like, literally wasn't even awake, neither one of us, and we didn't, nothing happened. It just, I mean, we didn't finish, like you said, but like that's happened quite a few times. And it's just that sexual energy, loving energy, mechanics, all that just was all there at the right time. And we didn't even have to be awake. We were just connected. So it's fairly cool.
you're basically given a buffet of options of like different, because when it comes to sex, it's very limiting, or what we have been taught or what we know.
Yeah.
There's so much more,
Yeah.
in the world of, say, Tantra. It is, so people who are not aware of it, it very much is this. It's about being able to celebrate the body, with or without a partner. It's being
Right.
able to celebrate sex, whether there was intercourse or not. It's
Mm-hmm.
being able to celebrate even the crying, the shadows that come up in the deep connection.
Yeah.
It's a really beautiful
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
So how do people reach you if they want to, coach with you, learn more about this?